first came to town with your family, and a little bit about that.
I was brought up in Passaic in northern New Jersey, and we used to vacation in Seaside every summer. And we spent 2 weeks, that's all we could afford. But the focal point was always the two carousels on the boardwalk. For me, that was the most fun. Rather than be on the beach, I'd rather be up here on the boardwalk, riding this carousel or the other one. And I always had a kind of desire to run it one day, own it one day. That never happened. I became a college professor. But it happened in a strange way because many years later I had a very special personal relationship with this machine in saving it many years later. But Seaside was always our special vacation point. We waited for it all year.
First started working up at Seaside Pier.
Well, I started working in Seaside when I was 14. I worked on a golf course and lockers on Hamilton Avenue. And my parents let me come down. I stayed in a little rooming house owned by an old lady, so she would watch me to be sure I was safe. And for the next few summers, I worked there until I got old enough to come up here and get this job. That was when I started college. And landing the job running this carousel was like going to heaven. The other carousel of my youth had burned down by then. It burned down in 1955, but this one was still here. And I came and just pulling the lever to start it up the first time was just like magic. I actually had two jobs here. I worked this in the daytime, and then at night I worked the train on the pier. There used to be a little kiddie train that went the perimeter of the pier. I was in the caboose of the train. I took the tickets. And one night, as the train was going across the crossing right out here, Ken Wynn, who then was one of the owners of Casino Pier, looked at me and said, "How you doing? Are you happy?" And I said, "No." He said, "Why?" He said, "I want to be in there all the time." And I pointed to this building. And the next day there was a note on my time card that I had the carousel full-time from opening to closing, 7 days a week. And this paid for my college education. I worked every summer, and then when I went to graduate school out in California, I even drove back every summer to run it again. And then in September I'd drive back to Berkeley, California to resume my studies. And all that continued until finally I got a fellowship, and went on to Europe. And then that part of my life ended, at least temporarily.
Do you remember?
Oh, yes. I was in love with that merry-go-round down there. I mean, I knew it. I knew every horse on it and the organs and stuff. And it was a Thursday morning. I was in school. And somehow word got around, it was in the Herald News, that there was a major fire in Seaside. And when I heard, sitting in my classroom doing whatever I was doing that morning, that it was that carousel, I cried, and they had to call my parents to come take me out of school and drive me down here, because I wouldn't believe it. And when I did come down, and I saw there was actually nothing there, just sort of a hole in the ground and charred remains, it was sort of unreal, and it broke my heart, because the magic of that circle that existed right there on DuPont Avenue was broken. And that's a very magical place in Seaside, because that's where everything began. In the early part of the previous century, there was nothing here. There was no boardwalk. And somebody named Joseph Vanderslice had an idea to put a carousel up on DuPont Avenue in a lone building all by itself. Manhasset Realty Company worked in tandem with the carousel to bring people here to look at property and buy parcels of land, and they'd ride the carousel. And over the years, things expanded around it. So that was the beginning. And since then, there have been 5 carousels in that very spot. This carousel has always been in this spot, though.
How long has this carousel been here?
This one came here in 1932. It was previously in Burlington Island Park, which was a major amusement park in an island off of Burlington, New Jersey. And it suffered several fires, but a very bad one in the late 20s. The carousel was mostly spared. There were some animals that were destroyed and stuff, but it went back to the factory and was put together again. And the owners of this property purchased it and had the idea to place it here as a sort of competition to the southern end of the boardwalk, the Freeman Amusement Center, which had been very successful and was very well developed. And originally it was just, this building came with it, and it was just right here all by itself. The arcade wasn't around it. Nothing else was around it. This property had originally been a fishery. And so here sat the carousel, but it was not very successful its first few years because there was no boardwalk connecting the south end to this end. And it was all here sort of in the sand. And 5 years later, the owners decided really to pour some money into this place and make it a destination point. So the pool went in, a fishing pier went in, the building around the carousel was built, much bigger than it is now because there was no road over here. And they wanted to make it a big exhibition hall. They were billing it as one of the largest on the northeast coast. So people would come and rent space and stuff like that. And that's when the north end of the boardwalk really, actually it's the middle of the town, but the north end of the then boardwalk really came into its own and gave some competition to the other end.
So jumping ahead, is it necessary and what it was about?
Well, as things developed, the road went through over here to my right. There was no road before that. And that took away a good half of this building. And so the carousel, there was all arcade and other rides and stuff like that that was lost. And the owners at the time felt that the carousel was taking up far too much room. It's very expensive real estate. And so they had the bright idea, they thought, to sell it and put something smaller in its place, and then they'd have more room for the arcade. And I heard about this. I was teaching at City University of New York, but I heard about this at an American Carousel Society convention that I attended in Morristown. And I was so thrilled, I ran home and wrote a letter to Ken Wynn, for whom I had worked many years ago, saying, is it truly your carousel's for sale? And if it is, I want to buy it. And I sent a very handsome check with the letter as a down payment. Now, handsome perhaps not in Ken's view, but very handsome in the view of a college professor. And it was, in any event, Ken called me on the phone and said it was for sale, and he told me that he was going to return my check though, and he would give me right of first refusal depending on what offers they got. So I said to him in return, I said, Ken, you know, it's really a little dilapidated, it needs paint and stuff like that. How about letting me first, in the summer, run it one more time, and then letting me do some restoration work on it until the sale goes through? And that can only help you. And he called me up again and he said, that's fine. And I ran it weekends that summer. I was in heaven again. And at the end of the summer, Ken came in here, gave me an envelope with a key to the building. And he said, here's a key to the building. Do whatever you want to this winter with your carousel. And that began the restoration effort. The sale fell through. There was whatever negotiations they had fallen through. So my family and my friends and anybody I could recruit at CUNY to come down here on the weekends came down with me. And we put up scaffolds. It wasn't heated then. And we redid the whole rounding board, the top, a lot of the horses. We redid the organ. We would work in here in the freezing cold and put our hands around light bulbs just to warm up now and again. And come the spring, when it opened, people were actually oohing and eyeing because all of a sudden the carousel was bright and shiny. And word got out to the New York Times that I was then a dean at the college, that I was working on this all winter, and there's an article on the wall over there, College Dean Labors to Save Carousel. So we got lots of press on television stations as well, on the major channels in New York City. And revenues went up, the ridership went up. People came just to see this merry-go-round. So it came off the market then, and it was safe. And a year later, it was named after me. There's a plaque on the wall at a surprise ceremony. It became the Floyd Moreland Carousel.
Can you tell us a little craftsman?
Sure.
Craftsman?
This, it's all hand carved, and there are very few left. There are maybe under 200, maybe 150 left, out of somewhere between 5,000 to 10,000 that had been made in the early part of the 20th century. And these carousels were largely crafted by cabinet makers and artisans who had immigrated to this country from Europe to find a better life. And they settled in Brooklyn, around Coney Island, and also in California and in Pennsylvania. This one was carved by William Dentzel, who was based in Philadelphia. And when the fire in Burlington, at Burlington Island occurred, a lot of the animals were damaged. So when it was returned to the factory, other animals by different carvers replaced the ones that could not be salvaged. And so it evolved into what's known in the carousel world as a mixed machine. It shows at least 3, possibly 4 carving styles. The machine itself dates to 1910, but because of the renovation that occurred, there are some animals that go back, or at least one that I can date back to 1895. So there are carvings from William Dentzel, by Charles Loof. There are 1 or 2 by Charles Carmel. There might be a Stein and Goldstein here, although some people argue with me on that. But in a way, it's a kind of veritable museum of carousel art. And when I used to be involved with it constantly, I used to give lectures here, and it was fun because you had this wonderful prop behind you going very slowly, and I could point to the different features of the animals and stuff, and of the band organ. Well, in all those years when I was in charge of it and managing it and restoring it, we were doing it on virtually a zero budget. I mean, the Winds and the Fitzgeralds and later on Bob Bennett would provide the supplies and stuff. But a lot of the real work was donated. And people would sponsor horses, just regular people, customers. They'd do it in memory of a loved one who had an affection for this carousel. They'd do it for a child, for a wife, for a husband or whatever, and there'd be surprises. You know, there'd be an unveiling and the person would come and say, "Oh boy, I have a horse named after me." And they would pay for the repainting, the stripping, and then their names went on it. And in return for that, they got not only the pleasure of having a horse named on a 1910 carousel for them, but also they got a free pass, a VIP pass that entitled them to ride forever. So it was a kind of way to provide ownership of the carousel, and that not only for people who are local, but also for people from far away. And that sort of gave the public a special interest in revering it. And that was always my major goal, I think. When I started restoring it, I wanted the Winds and the Fitzgeralds to fall in love with this machine again. And it happened. Ken himself put up a beautiful plaque in honor of his wife, Pat, when she passed away. They did fall in love with it, and I wanted the public to fall in love with it too, whether they had memories from the past or whether they were just coming to know it for the first time. And every New Year's Eve, I had a special party here early in the evening for horse sponsors, for employees, for people who had helped us over the years. And some people would come from far away, from Ohio and stuff, just to come to this party. And I had it catered, and there was champagne and stuff. And the last ride of the night, we ran the carousel in those days only at 3/4 speed because it really went fast. But that was the one time that I would run at full speed. And everybody would be drinking champagne, and I'd walk around it and toast everyone. And then I played Old Lang Syne on the organ. And this is a little bit of drama, but it's true. As I turned the carousel off and it came slowly to a halt, I shut the lights off. And the building was totally dark and it just creaked to a halt. And then everybody said, "Happy New Year." And everybody who was on it in those days, year after year, really loved this machine. And I think they loved the town that permitted the machine to be here, and to which the machine gave a lot in return.
What do you think it is about that?
Sure. I don't know. You know, the world is changing a lot, and young people change a lot. And I wish sometimes, as a professor and stuff, I wish sometimes we could sort of slow those changes down and give people a greater sense of history in the past. But what's so special about this ride? It's a ride of dreams. The other ones, people scream and they go upside down and everything's wild and crazy. But this is one you can dream on. I mean, it turns, it's gentle. You can close your eyes, you can be transported to another time. And it's a ride that appeals to many generations. We used to have this ride open on Thanksgiving Day and on Christmas Day. And those were my favorite days to run it because it was multi-generational. You'd have grandchildren and parents and grandparents and sometimes great-grandparents who would come here as part of their celebration of Christmas or Thanksgiving just to ride this, all together, with memories of what it was like when the grandparents brought their little kids on and now they had the great-grandchildren on and stuff. So that's what makes it special. And that never goes away. You just have to allow yourself to look at it and lose yourself a little. Put the cell phone away, the texting away for a minute, and just become absorbed by the magic that's here.
Can you tell us the organ?
Now that's really a spectacular instrument. That one was built by the Wurlitzer Company in 1923. And it works with a pneumatic system. It's got big bellows that generate air and pressure. And it's got all kinds of wooden pipes, you can see them there, and a glockenspiel. And it's everything plays by air pressure. The notes are activated by paper rolls, very much like a player piano. And it's got drums, the snare drum and the bass drum and stuff, so beating out the rhythms as the machine goes. In the heyday of carousels, of course, there were no recordings. You didn't have CDs and all kinds of spectacular equipment. So short of having a real band, you had to have a mechanical band organ. And it was always meant to be loud and noisy and beckon people toward the merry-go-round.
What keeps you here as a businessman?
Well, I was here in the first place because we vacationed here and I fell in love with it. And that love never went away. I mean, whether I was in New Jersey, New York, California, Italy, wherever I was in my life, part of my heart was always here. And I always wanted to come here to see how everything was, to see if it was still as I remembered it. And then when I had the chance to restore this, opening the little gift shop was really not originally meant to be a business. It was meant to generate funds to renovate this. It evolved into something else as time went on, but it never, even to this day, I mean, I'm fortunate to have been a professor and to have a pension and stuff like that. But that business was always meant to help instill an appreciation of this, what I call a moving sculpture that still survives on this boardwalk. Originally we sold only carousel things, all carousel replicas. We used to have a whole series of limited edition replicas of animals from this carousel. Every year we'd come out with two new ones, limited to 250 pieces.
Two on eBay right now, by the way.
Are they? What are they selling for? I shouldn't ask.
The bid as of this morning was $50 for two of them.
Oh God! You see, now see the world changed. They used to sell for $125, and we sold them all out immediately because people wanted to take home a piece of the carousel. But as time goes on, the whole collectible market, as you know, has sort of crashed in this economy, and tastes change. So it's very difficult to find carousel miniatures anymore. It's very difficult to find most collectibles anymore. So the shop over time has evolved into a souvenir shop on the boardwalk, although whenever we can find anything that's carousel or lighthouse or nautical related, we certainly have it there. And we try to keep it sort of upscale, a little more upscale than a lot of what's around us. So that was always our theme. And we still attract a very good clientele, but unfortunately the world's changed, and I'd love to bring it back to what it was, but...
Can you think of anything interesting?
Great stories. We've had weddings on here. We had a wonderful wedding. We've had lots of them, but we had a wonderful wedding in the true carnival tradition, where the vows, perhaps this very chariot or the other one, there was a trellis constructed over it, and the vows were taken by the then mayor, or were given by the then mayor of Seaside. And as soon as the vows were taken, the crew pushed the carousel ahead manually one revolution. That's the carnival tradition of weddings. And God forbid if anything in the future doesn't work out and you decide it's not the perfect match, you go back on the carousel and the crew pushes it back one revolution. And that's the divorce, and it's as if it didn't happen. So we've had... That's true. That's a true tradition. And many times people would bring an old person who's dying, who had fond memories of this machine and would come for a final ride. This machine reverberates through time. And I think people who remember it and know it keep it in their hearts. There are hundreds of stories I could tell you over the years. Someday I'll write a book about that.
I can't wait.
Happy 100th anniversary. Sorry, I'm sorry. God, I'm fired. My TV career is my TV career is down the drain.
What do you say?
Happy 100th birthday, Seaside Heights. Happy 100th birthday, Seaside Heights.